Well, good morning and good afternoon to everybody. My name's Ted Pattison of Critical Path Training, and in today's session we're going to look at different ways that you can integrate Power BI with Excel 2016 or earlier versions of Excel 2013 and Excel Online. So we have quite a bit to cover in this hour ahead of us. If I can quickly point out that at Critical Path Training we surprisingly offer training classes. So we have a 4-day Power BI bootcamp class that really drills down into Power BI with lots of hands-on lab exercises. The week after Thanksgiving, November 29th, you can either come to Tampa, where it's nice and warm, or attend remotely. And then we have the class again on the 23rd of January. For more information, criticalpathtraining.com. Okay, let's get into the program today. So there is a particular download. Now, let me quickly show you what happens if you go to a particular browser and you put that inside there and you go ahead and add. It's going to download about 20 megabytes worth of files. Give me one more second for this thing to open up here, and what I can show you is that we have a PDF version of the slides that you're going to see today inside there, along with 2 Excel workbooks that I'm going to use to show connecting to and importing workbooks. There's a Power BI desktop project and one other worksheet inside. So once again, I'm going to give you just a second if you want to copy down this URL. If you want to get it now, note that at the very end of the session, I'll also show this URL again. Why don't I give you just another 5 or 10 seconds if you want to go ahead and copy this down. I know that some people like me are very impulsive and they want to download things and follow along with the slides. Okay, so what we're going to be doing here, also I'll go ahead and I'll send this URL inside of the chat inside there so that everybody has it. And then we'll go ahead and start up. Okay, so let's go ahead, and what we're going to look at today is several different sections. First of all, we're just going to have an overview, a top-level view of what are the integration features that Excel has with Power BI Desktop. I want to start just with a little walkthrough of a Power BI Desktop project, because one of the things that I want to do in this session is to compare the querying and data modeling capabilities of Power BI Desktop, which probably many of you have already started using since you're interested in Power BI, with that of doing the same type of work inside of an Excel workbook inside there. We're going to dive down into what we can do in Excel workbooks as far as importing data into a data model, modeling the data with DAX and Power Pivot capabilities, creating reports, and then publishing them so that you can look at them through Excel Online. Now, also, one of the big things that we're going to do in today's session is we're going to look at the difference between importing Excel workbooks into Power BI and connecting to Excel workbooks. Okay. We'll also look a little bit more about what you can do with data models that you create in Excel if you plan to publish them into the Power BI service and start building Power BI reports on top of that. Okay. Also, we're going to look at Power BI publishing for Excel. It's an add-in, and it gives you kind of a quick way to take things inside of an Excel workbook and publish them to a Power BI dashboard. So that's just a couple minutes that we'll take at the end. And then also connecting from an Excel workbook to a Power BI data set through the Analyze in Excel feature. So those are the things that we're going to look at. Now, let's go ahead and start by taking a high-level overview of what are the Excel integration features with Power BI. Now, if I take a step back, there was a first version of Power BI known as Power BI for Office 365. And that was the version that Microsoft ran with for about 6 months to a year and then pulled the plug on, and they decided to build it from the ground up. It turns out that the first version of Power BI had dependencies on Excel where you had to use Excel to do various things. It also had dependencies on SharePoint. Now, a fellow who joined the Power BI team and started leading it named James Phillips decided that dependencies on Excel and SharePoint were a very bad thing for the Power BI platform. So about a year and a half ago, into preview, they released a new version that had no dependencies on Excel, no dependencies on SharePoint. And the main reason for that is that Power BI wants to compete with other cloud-based data access and BI frameworks, Tableau coming to mind. And the rate of innovation you have in these competitors are very fast. And so the Power BI team felt that if they had dependencies on Excel, something that has millions and millions of users around the world, trying to push out monthly updates just would not be possible. Okay, so the background I kind of started with is there is no dependencies for Power BI on Excel, so you could live a rich and happy lifetime working with Power BI without ever involving Excel. Okay, that being said, Microsoft also knows that Excel is incredibly popular and there's a huge investment that different organizations and companies have in their Excel workbooks, and wanting to be able to take them to the cloud gets to be important. So what we'll see is that Excel gets to be a good query and data modeling tool. It does many of the same things that Power BI Desktop does. It's also a tool to publish worksheet content, either just into Excel Online or with Excel Online into the context of a Power BI workspace. And we're going to see that. There's also the Analyze in Excel feature that Microsoft has been working on, such that if you like working with Excel workbooks and you're used to connecting to various databases, if someone has designed and published a data set in Power BI, you can just now connect directly to it with Excel and begin to work with it. Okay. Now, also what we'll see is Excel Online, and probably many of you know that, if you upload a Excel workbook into OneDrive for Business and you basically just click on it, it will start rendering through the browser. Now, it's been a while that we've been able to look at Excel workbooks through the browser, going all the way back to Excel services in SharePoint 2007. But things continue to get better, and the data modeling capabilities and the different rendering capabilities have been improving along the way. Okay. Now, let me start. I want to move over and take a look at a simple Power BI desktop project. Now, here's one that we use in one of our particular classes, the Power BI Bootcamp. Now, let me go back here, and I'm going to open up this Power BI desktop project. And I won't spend much time on this, but I want to make some points of comparison between what we do in Power BI desktop and what we can also do inside of Excel. Okay, well, first of all, I have several different queries. And these queries are basically getting their data from across the network from an Azure SQL database. And so once we've designed these queries, we can basically dump their data into a data model. So here's the simple data model that we're able to work with. So in Excel, in Power BI Bootcamp, we take about 2 days worth of labs to start extracting data with queries, dump it into the data model, and then starting to model the data using calculated columns, queries, and things such as dimensional hierarchies. Okay, then we're able to create reports, and after we create the reports, you're able to publish this particular Power BI desktop project, and that's what I was looking at back here. If I come back here, here's the benefits of publishing, is that you have this data set. Note that you also have a report. And when you have a Power BI desktop project, you have basically one main report, one data set, and they get published using the exact same name as the Power BI desktop project inside there. Another thing to note, and I want to point out one more thing about data refreshing, because it's going to be one of the points that distinguish between having your data modeled in Excel and Power BI, is that when you have a Power BI data set, and I say something such as schedule refresh, well, what we're able to do is we're able to have our credentials, and we're able to configure them in the Power BI service to get automatic refreshing. And so when you're working with Power BI Desktop or Excel and Power Query, you'll have to supply credentials to get to a database. However, when you publish something to the web, they never take the credentials you were using during your development design work. Instead, everything except for the credentials get published, and then you're going to have to come through up inside the Power BI service. For instance, I could come down here, go to Basic. We can now put in a particular Azure SQL account name, and once we're able to add the credentials for a cloud-based data source into the Power BI service, well, that's great. Now we can come back and we can either refresh on demand, or we can schedule a refresh to run once a day or up to 8 times a day inside there. Okay, so now you've seen that. Just a quick run through of what we can do in Power BI Desktop. Let's now revisit Excel and talk about the Excel data model. So in Excel, we can basically go back to earlier versions where we were able to install Power Pivot and Power Query. And once we have Power Pivot and Power Query, Excel 2010 for instance, you basically have the exact same data modeling and querying layer that we have in Power BI Desktop, just a much earlier version. Now, Excel gave us the capability of having a data model, a tabular database, which is just built into the Excel workbook format. So in Excel 2010, you would have to install Power Pivot to be able to get this functionality. As of Excel 2013, they basically changed the file format such that every Excel workbook that you create in Excel 2013 or 2016 has a data model. Even if you never add any tables, there's still a data model inside there. Now, as we start modeling the data, what we're going to see inside there is that there is going to be, looks like we've now reached the number of maximum attendees there. So I'm glad all of you are here with me. Anyway, with the Excel data model, you're able to basically use Power Query, pull as much data as you want inside there, and then basically load it into the data model. Now, when I say as much data as possible, one thing about the tabular database model is all the data has to be loaded into memory to be able to use it. So you can have tabular databases that have tables that have tens of millions, hundreds of millions of rows, as long as you have enough memory on your machine. Another big point there is if you're going to be loading in really large data models, what you want to make sure is that you're using the 64-bit version, not the 32-bit version of Excel, which is going to limit you to a much smaller amount inside there. Now, when you start modeling your data with Excel, you're using the XVelocity database engine. And that was basically introduced with Power Pivot, and now it's the exact same engine we use in Power BI Desktop, and it's the exact same that we use if we use SQL Server Analysis Services and we use the tabular model. And it's based on the programming language DAX, which we do our data modeling to create things like calculated columns and queries. Okay, now also remember, when you're working with Excel, you can import data into worksheets. That's kind of old school. Some of the problems there is that the data is not going to be compressed as much as if you load it into the tabular model. Also, you can't model the data, and you max out at about 1 million rows, where the tabular model doesn't give you those different limitations. Now, let me open up an Excel workbook. So there's a couple different Excel workbooks we're going to look at in this webinar. There's two, which are called Wingtip Sales Model 1 and Wingtip Sales Model 2. Note that these workbooks are basically identical. It's just a little bit later when we start working with connecting and importing workbooks. I want two identical workbooks to really bring out the difference between connecting to a workbook versus importing. So let me go ahead, open this up. And so with this particular worksheet that we're going to be using, note that I have things like customer charts, sales KPIs, but if I now enable the data, and then if I want to see some of the querying tools or the queries that we've written inside here, note that you can go to the data view, and there is a show queries tab inside here. Now, if you've used Power Query back with Excel 2010 or Excel 2013, as you move to Excel 2016, note that all the functionality that was in the Power Query add-in has just been added natively inside of Excel. Also, with both Excel 2016 and also with Power BI Desktop, Microsoft has retired or basically killed off Power Query as a brand name. So we just kind of refer to it as the queries inside there. Okay, now let's go ahead and enable this content right here. If I go ahead and I bring up one of these queries in edit mode, just in case you haven't worked with Power Query or the query tools in Excel 2016, what you'll find is that it works very much like the query tools inside of Power BI Desktop. You create queries, they have applied steps. If you look behind the steps inside here, if you're willing, the code that is written for queries is written in a language called M. And what you'll find is that as you create queries with Excel and you create queries with Power BI Desktop, the experience is almost identical, and there's just a couple features that one will have that the other one doesn't have. Power BI Desktop does move at a much more rapid clip, having updates every 30 days, and Excel doesn't match that. But still, you'll find they're fairly similar. Okay, so now we basically got all these different queries inside here. And so I'm now going to click Manage Data Model. And so if I go and I open this up, what you're going to see here is that there is the Power Pivot window. Now note that in Excel 2016, we still have the Power Pivot add-in. It's installed automatically, just like with Excel 2013. The add-in can be enabled or disabled, and it gives me the ability to look at the data, such as in diagram view. And one of the things that I'm trying to show here is that I can model this data with Excel or Power BI Desktop. And much of what I can do is exactly the same, except for a couple things that I'm going to point out along the way inside here. Okay, now back on the slides here. I just went through and we looked at the query tools. And the query tools use Power Query technology to give you a very simple view to be able to extract data, transform it, and dump it into the data model of the Excel workbook. Okay, after that, we can use Power Pivot. And what does Power Pivot give us the ability to do? Well, I can take the tables that have been imported by queries, and I can continue to model them by doing things like taking columns of data, converting their types, formatting their column values inside here. I'm sorry, I keep getting this message inside here from GoToWebinar. I'm going to try to say don't show this message again. But we're able to create calculated columns. We're able to create measures. They give you support for adding calendar tables. I'll take a quick look at that. And you can also add dimensional hierarchies. Now, one thing I want to point out, and I'm going to show this in the demo, is that in a data model you create in an Excel workbook, you have the ability to add a KPI or key performance indicator directly into the data model. The data models that you have inside of Power BI Desktop don't support this. Okay, so I want to basically bring that out and kind of show how we can create KPIs in an Excel workbook and then integrate those into a data model. Okay, now here's just some examples of working with the Power Pivot add-in. For instance, let's go back to this Excel workbook, and let's say I get out of diagram view. I go to data view. Notice that we get a tabular view of all of our data. So let's say I go to the customers table, we go over to age group, and here's just an example of using the DAX or data analysis expression language to be able to create a calculated column. So here's a calculated column that takes the customer's birth date and creates age. And then once I have the customer age, I want to do some categorization. So I want to put different customers into different buckets of age groups inside there. So there's an example of how we can create a particular calculated column. Now, Excel has this kind of strange way that you work with with measures inside here. Okay, I'm getting some kind of an error here, but what I want to do is let's move back to the Excel window. And if I go to Power Pivot, and in the Power Pivot tab, I drop down Measures or Manage Measures, you're actually adding them into Power Pivot. It just kind of gives you a much easier UI to work with. You know, for instance, let's say that we had a measure to calculate sales growth from the previous month. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Edit here. You know, so what you'll see is they give you this dialog. It's not the best editor experience that you'll ever see, you know, but it works and you get used to using it. You know, so here's something that basically takes the previous month and it takes this month's sales and subtracts last month's sales, then divides through by last month's sales and makes sure that we're filtering correctly for the output of this particular measure to be valid. Okay. Now, another thing I want to point out is that Excel in its data model supports this idea of a KPI that Power BI Desktop does not support. So if I click on Edit, notice that you start by creating a regular measure. Once you have created a measure, then if I go to Manage KPIs, you take a particular measure and you basically convert it into a KPI to put a visual aspect on top of it. So I just looked at a measure called Sales Growth KPI. And so what you can see is that we basically picked a KPI and then we're able to do things like set the different values inside. For instance, if I'm looking at sales growth from the previous month, you know, anything less than 0 is going to be negative, which is bad. And anything between 0 and 10% growth, we're going to have yellow, okay. Then we have green. Okay, so once again, just wanted to kind of show you the things, you know, that we have built into the data model. Okay, and then if we kind of look at, you know, how we're going to view this, you know, here's an example of a couple different worksheets that are looking at the data model. So here's one that gives us a slicer and a chart that allows us to integrate or drill down on the data. You know, here is a sales KPI inside there. You know, so once you've defined the KPI inside of the data model, you know, you can see how they add a visual aspect to the report. So someone's eyes can quickly glance down, see which, you know, which months have positive versus mediocre versus negative sales inside there. Okay, that's great. Let's go back, and we've just looked at various parts of this added. I also want to look at hierarchies. So adding dimensional hierarchies to a data model, you know, gets to be an important thing. And the way that you do it in Power BI Desktop, for instance, if I quickly return to Power BI Desktop here, what you're going to see here is that you cannot do it like in Excel where you go inside here and you right-click and you create hierarchies. Instead, in Power BI Desktop, you have to go into the Report Design view, and then you're going to be able to come down and you're going to be able to right-click and you'll create your hierarchies inside there. In Excel, with Power Pivot, it's very different. You go into Diagram view, you pick something such as Product Category, you right-click and you choose Create Hierarchy, and you basically create the hierarchies inside. Okay, now once we've created those, well, now we can start doing things, you know, such as inside of the Excel workbook, we're able to drill down on the hierarchies inside there. Okay, now the last thing before we integrate these into Excel Online and Power BI is I want to point out, I'm going to move through a couple slides here. So there's the chart we looked at. You know, there's basically integrating KPIs from an Excel data model into an Excel worksheet. Now, back in the Excel 2013, SharePoint 2013 era, Microsoft was all jacked up on a reporting layer that we referred to as PowerView. Now, PowerView was one of the first technologies that Microsoft gave us to create reports on top of the tabular model. You know, so for that, it's a good thing. The bad thing about PowerView, and we probably didn't realize it as much of the time, is it's completely dependent upon Silverlight to work correctly. Now, if I go back into Excel, and now I go to this PowerView report, when you open up Excel and you create a PowerView report, if you don't have Silverlight on your machine, it won't work, and you'll be prompted to install Silverlight. Now, if you're someone who's creating PowerView reports, it's probably not that big a deal to basically add PowerView, or I'm sorry, to install Silverlight on your machine. The problem is that any consumer that uses this PowerView report is also going to need to basically have Silverlight installed as well. And we'll see that that can create some particular issues. Now, let's go ahead, and I'm going to close down Excel. We're not going to use Excel anymore. But now what we're going to do is inside of the browser, let's go ahead and navigate up into the Office 365 cloud. And in particular, let's go ahead and navigate to OneDrive for Business. Now, when I get to OneDrive for Business, I'm going to upload workbooks here. And there's a lot of benefits of uploading workbooks. First, uploading a workbook to OneDrive will allow you to connect to it from Power BI. And then secondly, if you're not connecting but you're importing, if you import data from an Excel workbook, it will automatically update it once an hour. So let's go ahead and take these two different workbooks. Let's go ahead and connect right there. Here you can kind of see that they are uploading inside there. We'll give them another second to upload. And now before we do anything with Power BI, let's just take one of these Excel workbooks and click on it. And right in place, it will open it up in Excel Online. Okay, so now we've got this data model behind the Excel workbook, and it allows the user to basically click on the slicer and run queries. And inside the cloud, Microsoft is able to query this tabular database in my Excel workbook up in Excel Online. So the user can do things, such as look at different years. Now, another thing to note is that Power BI has lots of neat visuals. However, Power BI doesn't really have anything that matches the Excel pivot table experience. So there's things like the hierarchy slicer, but still you'll find that people have been using pivot tables for so many years and they're hooked on them. And as you try to kind of recreate the pivot table experience in Power BI, you're going to come up short, especially for users that want that exact experience inside there. Okay, now also note that looking through the browser, well, I can basically look at this sales KPI inside there, and as users look at different years, it can basically keep requerying the data model that's been loaded into the cloud. They can look at different regions, slice and dice the data, and it's able to get those calculations and provide them for them. Okay, now here's the user going through the browser. And now let's go to that PowerView report. So here's where the user begins to cry because the user doesn't have Silverlight installed, therefore can't access anything to do with PowerView. What you're going to find is if you really need to access something that someone has created with PowerView, probably you should go through the Internet Explorer, and with the Internet Explorer now open, let's go ahead and let me open this up one more time here. We'll open up the Internet Explorer. We'll get to this particular site. Now I'll open up the exact same workbook, and only because I have Silverlight installed on this machine, can I navigate to the PowerView report and basically see that thing rendering inside of the browser. Okay, now with PowerView, I'm guessing that with as many people that we have at this session, that some of you, have created a inventory of Excel workbooks that use PowerView reports. So that's one of the things that we want to look at as we're going through. But the idea that users then have to use IE, not Chrome, have to have Silverlight installed, gets to be a real drag on you being able to, reach a broad audience, and forget about getting to an iPhone or an Android. So generally, we're trying to move away from PowerView, which is one of the things that Microsoft is going to help you do. Okay, me get back to the slides for a second. So I just wanted to point out and demonstrate, how if you created a bunch of things with PowerView, those dependencies on Silverlight can be pretty painful as you're trying to reach mobile devices and really, leverage the capabilities of the Power BI platform. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to take those two different Excel workbooks that are identical, and we'll look at the difference between connecting versus importing. Okay, so let's kind of start by connecting to an Excel workbook. So what we'll see is that connecting, the workbook file becomes the live source of the data. And they basically just use the Excel online host to basically render that worksheet right inside of Power BI. Okay, let's go back to Power BI. So far, all I have here is one report and one data set from my Power BI desktop project inside. So I'm going to pick Connect to Data. Now, the next thing is Import or Connect to Data. Yes, that's what I want to do, one or the other. We'll go ahead and click on Get. We'll now click on OneDrive for Business inside here. And once I get here, I'm going to see those two different workbooks. The first one I will connect to. The second one I will import. So I click on this right here. Now this first button is a big lie. It doesn't really connect to data. It just takes you to the page where you decide to either connect or import. So we'll click on the big lie button. Now we'll get to this page right here. And what I'm going to do with the first one is I want to connect to the data. So we'll go ahead and click Connect. Now it's going to take just a second. And what you'll see over here, inside of the browser is that all of a sudden inside the reports, you'll see a new report and it's got the little icon telling you that that is an Excel workbook. Notice that there's no underlying data set because the underlying data set still lives in the Excel workbook that I uploaded to OneDrive for Business. We go ahead and we click on that right here. And so the big benefit I get right here is basically being able to leverage the things that I have built in Excel, but yet to display them through the Power BI user interface experience. Okay, so there I get, and I can see that chart. I go back here, and I'm in Power BI, though it's an Excel workbook. And so if your users really need that Excel workbook drill down of the pivot table, this is how to provide it to them. Just keep it in an Excel workbook and connect to it and provide it right inside of Power BI. Okay, keep going down here. We look at the sales KPI. That works great. And then, of course, when I go over here to look at the one particular Excel worksheet that is a PowerView report, I basically have sadness because it's not working correctly because I'm using Chrome inside there. Once again, if we go back here into the Internet Explorer and we basically have Internet Explorer, we have Silverlight installed, what you'll see is that, yes, indeed, you can leverage that PowerView report inside there, and you could basically make it show up inside of the Power BI workspace inside there. And once again, we question, whether, that's a good thing that we have so many dependencies when Power BI is really all about broad reach, reaching mobile devices, and all of a sudden you've published something inside here, that is going to be problematic with that. Okay, so let me go back to the slide for a second. So what I just did is I connected to a workbook, and the Excel workbook, as it lives inside of OneDrive for Business, is the live data source. And all we're really doing is using the Excel online host to render that workbook inside the context of a Power BI workspace inside there. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is import a workbook into Power BI. And that's going to be completely different because it's going to take the data model from the workbook and basically convert it and create a Power BI data set from it. Okay. Another thing is that it gives you a hand if you're trying to get rid of your PowerView dependencies, and we'll see those in just a second. Okay, so we've just looked at hosting Excel Online inside of Power BI by connecting to a workbook. So the next thing that we're going to do, after connecting to the report is we'll go ahead and we'll do an import. So importing, once again, PowerView reports are going to get converted into a Power BI report with no Silverlight dependencies inside there. Okay, what do I mean by that? Well, let's go back here. So you've already seen that I connected to Wingtip Sales Model 1. So now we'll do the exact same thing. We'll say get data, OneDrive for business. We'll get to this sheet right here, and now we're going to use the identical workbook, Wingtip Sales Model 2. We'll click on the big live button, connect, and then this time I'll click import, not connect. Okay, so let's go ahead, click on this right here. And so right now it's going through this import process where once again there is a data model inside the Excel workbook, and that is being imported or copied into your Power BI workspace. Note down here, look down under data sets. Because this one we imported, we now get a data set, Wingtip Sales Model 2. Notice that we never got a Wingtip Sales Model 1 because we connected to it. Now, when I come back here and I click on this, well, now I have a report. What's a little bit confusing is I have a page 1 that has nothing on it, and then I have a second page from the PowerView report inside there. Okay, now, let's forget about PowerView for just a second. Now, let's look at the other worksheets. So when I connected to that, I basically am able to leverage all this work I have done inside of Excel as far as creating worksheets that have pivot tables and charts and different drill down scenarios. When I look at the report that has been created, when I import the workbook, none of that work has been done. It gives me basically page 1, and now I can go into edit report and I can start building things out inside there. It's fine if I want to come down and I now want to go to the calendar, and let's go ahead and create something for the month inside here. And for that particular month, we want to see sales revenue, and then we want to see something like sales revenue growth from the previous month. Maybe we want to go ahead and see things like the the status of that inside there. So some of the things that you can see inside there, let me change one thing, is that you can build brand new Power BI reports from the data model, and it's neat that you can do things like take KPIs that aren't allowed in Power BI, desktop created data sets, but can be converted from a Excel data set into a Power BI data set. But at the same time, you really have to go back and kind of look at, I'll go ahead, save this report, but when I go back and look at when I connected to it, there's no work I have to redo. I'm basically able to leverage all these worksheets that I've designed inside there, and then when we go back and kind of look at the import model, you got the data, but now you're starting from scratch, visualizing that data inside there, with one exception. And that one exception is that I had one Power BI, I'm sorry, let me say that. I had one PowerView report in that Excel workbook. And so every time you have something in PowerView, when you import, what they do is they basically take that PowerView report and they convert it into a Power BI report. Now, when I go and take a look at this report here, all the PowerView and all the Silverlight dependencies have been completely removed. And they've been replaced with just basically standard things in Power BI, such as the map and the slicer inside here. So what you can see is that they give you a helping hand to basically quickly generate the PowerView report. Now, if my worksheet had had 10 PowerView reports, there would be a report with 10 pages, one page for each converted PowerView report. But the big benefit there is now I've shed my Silverlight dependencies, and now if I want to target other browsers and I want to start targeting iPhones and mobile devices, well, now I have so much more capability to do that now that I've gotten rid of all those Silverlight dependencies inside there. Okay, one other thing to note here. Let's go back and save my report, and let's go back to the data model. You know, one of the things that I showed you before is that when you create a Power BI data set with Power BI Desktop, and now I say something like schedule refresh, you know, I'm able to set my data source credentials inside there, and I can basically set my refreshing schedule. You know, I can basically say, go back to that database, and once a day, or, you know, maybe several times a day, we can go ahead and let's say that, you know, at 6 a.m. I want to go ahead and refresh the data. And then again, at lunchtime, I want to refresh the data inside there. You know, so the idea is that when you have a Power BI data set and you've published it with Power BI Desktop, you have a lot of control about when the refreshing occurs. Okay, great. Let's go ahead and apply. Now, let's go back and take a look at the data set that was converted from that workbook. Now, first thing is, for this to work, that Excel workbook has to have been uploaded to OneDrive for Business. Once you've uploaded it for OneDrive for Business, I go back and I choose Schedule Refresh, there's something which is called OneDrive Refresh. So the idea is that you have no control, but once an hour, and that's basically what Microsoft tells you, there's a timer job that goes off, and about once an hour it goes back and checks the timestamp to basically see if you've uploaded a new version of that Excel workbook inside there. And if it does, it's basically telling you that it's going to then import the new Excel workbook data, you know, and overwrite what was in there before. You know, but you don't get any type of control, and certainly there's nothing in Excel online that's going to let you go back and set any type of refresh parameters. So when you're publishing an Excel data model, you know, quite often refreshing the data means opening it up in Excel, refreshing the data, and then basically uploading the new copy of the workbook, the XSLX file, on top of the old one inside there. You know, so you really have to, you know, work with Power BI Desktop or direct with data sources and not with an Excel workbook if you want a lot of control over the refresh intervals inside there. Okay. So what we just looked at there is the difference between connecting to an Excel workbook and importing. And hopefully those demos really brought it out. And I also wanted to provide those two different files for you. You know, so after this session, if you want to go up and try the exact same thing, you know, with these two workbooks, upload them to OneDrive for Business, connect to one, import the other, and you'll see the exact differences inside there. Okay. Couple questions. Doesn't Silverlight work under Chrome? You can get it working, but generally a developer might have an easier time than a business user. So expecting people to get Silverlight and PowerView working with Chrome is an exercise in frustration from my experience. While you can do it, other technical people can do it, you're just going to have users that have Chrome and can't get inside there. So I think, you know, what Microsoft has acknowledged is that Silverlight dependencies are problematic, and by importing an Excel workbook with PowerView reports and having them automatically converted over to Power BI reports, you know, is basically the migration path they've given you. Okay, now let's go ahead and keep going through here. A couple more slides we're going to look at. So the next section we're going to look at is just a couple points about publishing data models. So an Excel data model can be imported into Power BI. And I've just basically showed you that importing a worksheet will basically do that for you. Now, I uploaded my workbook to OneDrive for Business before I did the import. I can also import directly from my C drive, if I have it running locally. It's just that when you upload to OneDrive for Business, they have that automatic refresh where they're looking at the file, the source file, and once an hour, if they see that it's been updated, they'll basically go through the import process and refresh your data inside there. Okay, now also what you saw is that the data set, once you import it, can be used to start designing reports and dashboards. So going back into the browser here, and then going back and taking a look at, let me go back here, and once we get back here, so what you'll see is that if I go back to page 1, when we do the import, it doesn't build out all the visualizations and tables and pivot tables we had on our worksheets. You have to kind of start from scratch, but you're able to start building things. And so if you have someone who likes to data model in Excel, or you have no control, you just know that the data model lives in Excel, and you want to start building Power BI reports and dashboards on top of that, this is the approach to be able to do that. Okay, now, next thing we're going to look at is using this special add-in, which is called the Power BI Publisher for Excel. And how do we get it? Once you have gone to the Power BI app, just at app.powerbi.com, there is a download menu, and Power BI Publisher for Excel is one of the things we have inside there. So let's go ahead and download. And since I'm running a 64-bit version of Office and Excel, we're going to go ahead and download this inside there. Let's get rid of this. But now we'll come back here once this executable has downloaded. I should now be able to go through the installation process. I've done this enough times where I'm comfortable doing it live in front of a webinar. So pretty quickly we go through, we click next, and it's just a simple Excel add-on that was created by people on the Power BI team. Now, let's go ahead and start this up. So I don't want to make you think this does more than it does. It basically is able to take just about any type of element from an Excel workbook and basically add it as a snapshot, basically a PNG file into a dashboard. So as a for instance, I've got this simple worksheet right here inside of my Excel workbook, and let's say that we want to use this. Now, the first time you open up Excel after installing this, shows you this little dialog. I'm going to go ahead and say, don't show that again. But the idea is, let's say that I have things, such as a chart, and I have a pivot table inside here, and I want to pin these inside. So what you'll see is that once you've installed this add-in, a Power BI tab will now show up in Excel. And the idea is that you have the ability to pin things. So I can now go to this chart and I can say, I would like to pin that. Now, the first time you use it, it basically needs to connect. Even though you might already have Excel and you might have your user account that you use for Power BI in there, it will still likely ask you to put that in separately. So what I'm going to do is log on. And once I log on, it then is going to give me the ability to pin this particular element to either an existing Power BI dashboard, or I can create a new one. So here, find an existing dashboard, or in my case right here, create a new dashboard, and I'll just call this Excel Fun inside here, and let's go ahead, choose OK. Okay, so now I've taken some element. Now, the flexibility of this tool is just about anything that you can have inside of Excel, you can pin to a dashboard. Let's go back over here. Let's go back into Power BI. There is Excel Fun. I go ahead and look, and that has been basically added inside there. I try to do things like use slicers, drop things down. This is just a static image file. Okay, let's say that my data changes. Okay, so we go back here. We got a couple different quarterbacks. Let's say that I'm tired of one of these particular quarterbacks or something. Getting more data inside there. So let's say that if I like Eli Manning, I want to fudge the data here and give him 99 touchdown passes in a particular year. Let's now go through there. You can kind of see that I've made some changes to the data. Let me just kind of change that a little bit more so it will be more obvious inside there that I've changed the data. Let's go ahead and save. I come back here. Now you can kind of see some things are different, but the idea is I come back here and I go to the pin manager, and what the pin manager is going to tell me is that we need to go ahead and update that. So the idea is that you basically just have a PNG image, and by clicking update, we can basically update things, but things aren't going to update automatically. You're going to have to bring up this pin manager and find things that have updated and proactively update those things on your dashboard inside there. So it can be handy when you're trying to do things quickly, for a meeting or a report, but as an ongoing mechanism where you want updates to happen automatically, you might find it a little bit clunky to be able to deal with. But certainly it's one of the integration features that we have from Excel to Power BI. Now, the last thing that we're going to look at is connecting to Excel from Power BI. And I take it back, connecting from Excel to a Power BI data set. So the idea is, let's say that you really like working with Excel, you like creating pivot tables and pivot charts, and you connect it to just about any kind of database, but now someone else in your company has published a data set with Power BI Desktop, and you want to be able to connect to that. So Excel is going to be connecting to a data set that lives up in the cloud in the Power BI service. Now, first thing we have to do is we have to install a driver or a provider for the underlying data access layer. So once again, we'll go back to Power BI inside the browser. We'll download this one particular Analyze in Excel. We'll go ahead, we'll choose OK. Now, it's now taking me to a download. So there's SQL, AS, OLADB, MSI. And once this thing downloads, it will then take me through a installation process. And just for grins, I'll go ahead and shut down Excel before we do this inside here. And now it's downloaded the provider installer. Now we'll go ahead and we'll say open, and it will take me through this process. It's really just kind of installing database drivers on your local machine. Let's go ahead, choose install. And so now that we have some things open, I think I have to shut down a couple more things inside there. I have to shut down Power BI Desktop as well as Excel. Let's go ahead, retry. SQL Server, BSS Writer. Okay, I've opened something else up. Give me 1 second to see if I can close down enough to make this work inside here. And okay, I think I can keep going through there and it'll still install. Okay, now once you've done this installation, the idea, I'm not going to restart this obviously, you don't need to restart, but once you've gone through this process, the idea is that you can go to any type of data set that you have in Power BI. So I have this one right here that I published from Power BI Desktop. If I want, I can come back here and I can start using the fields list and start creating Power BI reports and dashboards, but that's not what I want to do. I want to work in Excel. So the idea is I can come back here and choose Analyze in Excel. Now when you choose that, it can't really determine in the browser whether you've installed a provider yet. So it's always going to bring this up, and once you've installed, you can say, I've already installed these updates to try to make it so it's not going to keep bringing that up. But notice that it's downloading this file. It's basically a text file with the connection information. It has an ODC extension. And the idea is that once this downloads and you choose Open, it's then going to open up Excel. There is going to be a warning, and you'll have to basically enable the driver inside here. You're also going to have to go through and authenticate against the Power BI service. But at the end of the day, what we should now be able to do is connect from Excel and my workbook, and now I basically have all the goodness of this data model that someone has created. For instance, if we come down here and we look at something, such as here's a hierarchy of the product category inside. What do I want to look at in terms of sales? Maybe I just want to look at sales revenue inside here. But what you're going to see is that now we can basically do the exact same things in Excel that we've been doing against other types of databases, but just now I have an Excel workbook that's going directly against a Power BI data set. Now, one thing that many of you will try that will not work, what if I take this workbook that's running in the Excel rich client and I try to publish this to Excel online? You'll find that that does not work. So really what this requires is that you have, basically the database engine behind the Excel rich client inside there. So if you want to create one of these because you want to look at the data in the Excel rich client, you can go ahead and save that workbook, up into SharePoint Online or up into OneDrive for Business. And as long as other people that use it download it and load it into Excel, the rich client, not Excel Online, it will work fine. Okay, but if you now try to upload it to Excel Online, you'll find that there's no query engine. So you won't be able to drill down into pivot tables. Slicers don't work inside there. So just keep that in mind as you use this particular feature. Okay, and that basically takes us to the end of our content for today. So a couple things that I want to point out. One is that if you're not a religious follower of the Power BI team blog, you should be. And so especially the last couple days of the month when they put out their updates to the Power BI service and Power BI desktop, everything I've learned about Excel and its integration, the first wind I got of it, was basically from things that were posted by team members on the Power BI team blog. So once again, that's a great resource. I would go several times a month, especially at the last couple days of the month, to look for the updates. One more little plug, if you're interested in drilling down into Power BI as a platform because you want to be able to master it or you need to set up the environment for others to use, we have Power BI Bootcamp at Critical Path Training the week after Thanksgiving, not on the Monday, but we start on the Tuesday. The 29th, we have a 4-day, and then also in January a 4-day. So we have a really good set of topics and good hands-on labs to really drill down into these topics. And then finally, what did we cover? Well, we looked at Excel integration with Power BI. And while Power BI as a platform has no dependencies on Excel, there are lots of different integration points, and Microsoft has given us lots of different ways to take the large inventory of Excel workbooks that we have and basically to begin, leveraging those inside of the Power BI platform. Connecting to an Excel worksheet basically just allows us to use Excel online to render it inside of the Power BI user interface in the cloud. Importing does something very different. It actually imports the data model from the Excel workbook and creates a Power BI data set that then you could basically start using to create Power BI reports and dashboards, and you can begin to target all the things that you can target with the Power BI platform, including mobile devices inside there. We saw some special attention that Microsoft has given to PowerView. I guess to some degree they're a little sorry that they encouraged us to go down the PowerView road a couple years ago, and then there was a big pushback as far as the dependencies of Silverlight and it not working on many other platforms and being a pain to work with in other browsers as well. So what we've seen is that when you import an Excel workbook that has PowerView reports, it automatically converts them into non-Silverlight dependent Power BI reports that then you could basically take and continue to work with. At the end, we saw two little downloads. One was the Power BI Publisher for Excel, an add-in that allows you to take different elements from your Excel workbook and quickly publish them or take screenshots of them pretty much and push them up into a Power BI dashboard. Remember that there's no automatic updating, so you will have to, do the automatic updating manually yourself as things update inside there. And then finally, we looked at installing the provider so that directly from Excel on your desktop, you can connect to a Power BI data set and basically start using all your Excel skills that you've basically been building over the last 20 years to build some impressive pivot tables, pivot charts, spark lines, anything that you can create in Excel, you can basically layer on top of the data that you've imported from a Power BI data set. And then finally, what we have down there is the URL. So at the bottom of this slide, and I'll leave this up there for a little bit, there is the URL that you can use to download that one zip file that has the slides and the Excel workbooks that I've used today. Okay, so now we're done with our session, and I'm going to basically go through and look at the different questions that have come in. If you want to go ahead and post a question, I'll make sure I get to all the questions before we quit for the day. Okay, so first question, how and where do we download the content that's on this particular slide? Okay, next question is this recorded? Yes, this session is being recorded, and there will be a follow-up email that we send to all of you that will have a link, and hopefully by the end of business today, we'll have a link where you can go ahead and watch this again on YouTube. Okay. Now, one more question. Is there actually a Power BI desktop client software, or are you doing everything from a browser in the cloud? So most of what I did today was from the browser. The only time I opened up Power BI Desktop was to kind of show you an equivalent project that I've created in Power BI Desktop that was very similar to what we built in the Excel workbook. So the modeling tools are very similar when it comes to creating queries and modeling the data. What's very different is once you've got your data model, Excel has a very different set of tools and visualizations that you build on top of data models. And you could argue that, the benefits of doing your reporting, up in Power BI with pure Power BI reports is that we can now have both reports and dashboards. Dashboards are great for targeting mobile devices. They have other benefits of automatically refreshing, if you have real-time data under a real-time dashboard and stuff. Okay, another question. Does this work on Macs? So the one thing that does not work on a Mac is Power BI Desktop. Excel works on the Mac. Everything that we looked at through the browser will work on the Mac, with the exception of PowerView. So PowerView is evil from the point of view of people that have Macs inside there. Okay, for Power BI Bootcamp, how many days? What is the length of each day? So Power BI Bootcamp, we have 4 days, and if I just spin back here for 1 second right here, since somebody did ask this particular question, we cover about 3 modules a day, and each module has about 75 minutes of lab time. So introducing the Power BI platform, getting started with Power BI Desktop, drilling into the query features of Power BI Desktop. We have a couple different lectures on data modeling, getting going with creating calculated columns and features and creating dimensional hierarchies, creating calendar tables, creating complicated measures with DAX to do things like calculate the top 5 products or the top 10 customers. We have some drill down into creating interactive reports and doing things like using custom visuals that you download, integrate into your report, building dashboards, and then a second lecture on specifying dashboards for mobile devices. We talk about managing Power BI gateways and different refresh scenarios and when do you need a gateway. How do you deal with on-premise data, refreshing that. We have a lecture that has much of the topics that we just looked at with Excel. We also have an introduction to working with R and using R to be able to extract data, transform data, and create visualizations, and how you can do that right from within Power BI Desktop. And then a section on working with SQL Server Analysis, or SQL Server 2016, and leveraging both SQL Server Analysis services and SQL reporting services that have been, both had big redesigns, and how to integrate them with the Power BI platform as well. So basically there will be 4 days. It goes from about 9 to 5 o'clock East Coast time. Okay. So with that, so it is 4 days, 8 hours each day. Yes, that is correct. Maybe we let you out an hour early on day 4, something like that. And then just there's a big difference between how fast some students can go through the labs in 45 minutes. Other people take an hour and a half. And what we like to do is just give you plenty of labs, for those that really like digging in and don't really get it until you've seen that you've put it under your fingertips and you've done it yourself. So that's a pretty important philosophy of the way that we create our lab exercises. Okay. We have no other questions, so I'd like to thank everyone for attending this. And as I said, look for an email from us later today or early tomorrow, and we'll have the recording so you and all your peers can go ahead and watch it again. Anyway, thanks everyone for attending today's seminar, and you'll be hearing from us soon. Thank you.